Welcome to 8.4 Converting Measurements. This is our last lesson in the Module 8, Applying Ratios and Rates. Our essential question for this lesson is how do you convert units within a measurement system? So below is the conversion chart for the STAR test. You'll become familiar with this as we work through this lesson and then into our geometry lesson. Here we have length, volume and capacity, and weight and mass. In all three sections we have customary and we have metric units. Customary units are mostly used in the United States. We have miles, yards, feet, and inches with our length, gallon, quarts, pints, cups, and fluid ounces for volume and capacity. And for weight and mass we have tons, pounds, and ounces. In our metric, our length is kilometer, meter, centimeters, and millimeters, and that's only a few. Our volume and capacity consists of liters to milliliters, and our weight and mass consists of kilograms, grams, and milligrams. As we work through this unit, you will discover that the metric unit actually has a lot more than just what is listed in our conversion chart. We actually have kilograms, hectograms, decagrams. Those are the prefixes to our meters, liters, and grams. And it continues with deci, centi, and milli. So our length will consist of meter, volume capacity will be liter, and weight and mass will be gram. Alright, so when converting between measurements, you can set up a proportion to solve this. Let's see what that would look like with the proportion. So our example says, how many quarts are there in 10 pints? So we already know that 1 quart is the same as 2 pints. If you look up here in your customary conversions, we have 1 quart equals 2 pints. Alright, so we want to know how many quarts are in 10 pints. Alright, so we know that 1 quart is to 2 pints. We know that this is the same thing. And if we have 1 quart on top and 2 pints on bottom, then we need to set up our unknown quarts on top and our 10 pints on bottom because that is our given. Now, can we switch these two ratios? Can we put this side over here and switch these? Absolutely. Can we switch quarts and pints? Yes, as long as you do it on both sides. But since our example is given this way, we'll just leave it. Now, the example that they did, they wanted us to use the cross-multiply method, but we are not there yet. So we are going to use the method that we know, which is the hamburger method. So how do you go from 2 to 10? You multiply by 5. So how do you go from 1 quart to this unknown quart? Multiply by 5. And 1 times 5 is 5 quarts. Alright, so our next example says, how many centimeters are there in 2 kilometers? So we can use ratios and proportions because we already know that there are 1,000 meters in 1 kilometer. And we learned that from our conversion chart. Alright, so let's use the hamburger method that we know. So if we move from 1 kilometer to 2 kilometers, that's multiplying by 2. So what do we do to the top? You got it. Multiply by 2. And 1,000 meters turns into 2,000 meters. Oops. Alright, so if we have 2 kilometers, then we have 2,000 kilometers as well. Another way that we can solve these is by using, or another way to convert measurements is by using, I'm sorry, let me get my cursor back. A conversion factor. So another way to convert measurements is by using a conversion factor. So a conversion factor, sorry, let me move that up. A conversion factor is a rate comparing two equivalent measurements. So here we're using a rate, not a ratio. Remember that a rate compares two different units. A conversion factor is comparing two equivalent measurements. So let's check out Elena. It says, Elena wants to buy 2 gallons of milk, but can only find quart containers for sale. How many quarts does she need? First of all, we need to find the conversion factor. So we know that we are working with gallons and quarts. According to our conversion table from STAR, we have 4 quarts equals 1 gallon. And remember, if one of these is a 1 and we create a unit rate, the 1 goes on bottom. So for every 1 gallon, we have 4 quarts. Alright, so then we need to multiply the given measurement by the conversion factor. So how many gallons do we need? According to the story, Elena wants to buy 2 gallons. And we're going to multiply, this is supposed to be a dot, we're going to multiply that by our conversion factor. And our conversion factor tells us that we have 4 quarts for every 1 gallon. So how does this work? Well, if we multiply a whole number times a fraction, then we make this whole number into a fraction by putting a 1 under it. We can do the same thing here. I know that looks a little messy, I'm sorry. Alright, so now we have gallons, 2 gallons over 1 times 4 quarts over 1 gallon. And if we cross-simplify, remember when we multiply we can cross-simplify, and that means we can take out whatever they have in common. Well, if we look at 2 gallons on top here and 1 gallon on bottom here, what do they have in common? Gallons. We can take those gallons out. So now we have 2 times 4 quarts. And what is 2 times 4? 2 times 4 gives us 8. And if you look right here, all that's left is quarts. So in 2 gallons you have 4 quarts. So Elena needs, 8 quarts. One final piece of information I'd like to leave with you. If you'll go back to your first page, we have this metric conversion on its side, and it says that we go from kilo to hecto, deca, meter, liter, gram, deci, centi, and milli. What does this mean? So if we started with 1 meter or 1 liter or 1 gram, so we started with this 1 right here, If we move to the left, if you look at your number line, when you move to the left on a number line, your number gets smaller. So when you move to the left on this metric conversion chart, you're going to be dividing by 10 each time you move. And if you move to the right, if you look at your number line, when you move to the right, your number gets greater. So when we move to the right, we're going to multiply by 10 each time. So what does that look like? If we have, let's say, 200 meters, and we want to know how many kiloliters are in 200 meters. We'll take our decimal. Let me get a pen. We'll take our decimal and we're going to go from meters to deca, hecto, kilo. We have moved 1, 2, 3 times. So we're going to say meter, this is going to be a little bit of a tight squeeze down here, deca, hecto, and kilo. So that means that there are 2/10 of a kiloliter in 200 meters. So here we had 200 meters, and that equals 2/10 of a kilometer. Okay? What about if we have, 3 liters, and we want to go to milliliters? So if we have 3 liters and we want to move to milliliters, we move 1, 2, 3 times to the right. So with our liters, let me get my cursor. We have our 3 liters. We move 1, 2, 3 times to the right. So there our decimal moved 1 time, moved 2 times. So that would be 30 deciliters, 300 centiliters, and 3,000 milliliters. Oops. So you'd have 3,000 milliliters in 3 liters. Some people have trouble remembering the kilo, hecto, deca, deci, centi, milli, and I'll show you how I was taught. In order to remember this, you would state the acronym King Henry doesn't, and then meters was mind, liters was like, and grams was gag. Drinking chocolate milk. So this told us the letters that went there, and if you got to deca and deci, you would just have to remember what those were as far as doesn't and drinking. But if you had meters, this would be King Henry doesn't mind drinking chocolate milk. If you're working with liters, this would be King Henry doesn't gag or like drinking chocolate milk. And then grams would be King Henry doesn't gag drinking chocolate milk. And we will go over this some more during our class time on Tuesday.